Look what the cat dragged in. Lost your knitting group, Grandma? The clerk's voice dripped with scorn. She leaned on her cane, silver hair catching the harsh light, and ignored them. Her request silenced the entire store. The air in Valhalla Tactical was thick with the scent of gun oil, testosterone, and freshly brewed coffee. It was less a store and more a shrine to modern warfare, a place where gleaming black rifles were displayed on slate-gray walls like sacred artifacts. The men who moved through its aisles did so with a proprietary swagger, their conversations a low rumble of ballistics data, military jargon, and exaggerated hunting stories. It was into this temple of masculinity that Eleanor Vance walked, the tap-tap-tap of her simple wooden cane a jarring interruption to the room's rhythm. She was 60, maybe older, with a cascade of silver hair pulled back in a simple, no-nonsense ponytail. A faded olive drab jacket, the kind you might find in a surplus store, hung loosely on her frame. Her jeans were practical, her boots sturdy but worn. She carried no purse, only the quiet dignity of someone who had seen more than this room could possibly imagine. Her presence immediately curdled the atmosphere. At the front counter, a young woman with a name tag reading Tiffany and an acrylic manicure that could double as a weapon system, stopped polishing a glass display case. She exchanged a smirk with a customer, a man in his late 40s with the telltale paunch and wraparound sunglasses of a man who desperately wanted to be an off-duty cop. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Tiffany's tone was saccharine sweet, but her eyes were cold. "The antique mall is 2 blocks down. Lots of lovely teacups there." The man next to her chuckled. "Nah, Tiff. I think she's looking for the pharmacy. This isn't the place for your hip replacement prescriptions, honey." Eleanor offered no reaction. Her gaze, a piercing gray that seemed to absorb the harsh fluorescent light without reflecting it, swept across the store. She wasn't browse, she was assessing. The cane wasn't a sign of frailty, it was a tool, used with an economy of motion that suggested it was an extension of her will. She moved deeper into the store, her path taking her past a pair of regulars. One was an older man, his belly straining against a camo t-shirt, who held court every Saturday with increasingly embellished stories of his time in Vietnam. He stopped mid-sentence, watching her pass. "Well, I'll be," he muttered to his audience. "Lost a bet, did she?" His companion, a younger man with a meticulously groomed, operator beard, and tactical pants loaded with empty pouches, chimed in. "Probably a dare from her grandkids. Go into the scary gun store, Grandma." Pathetic. The laughter was low and confident, the shared amusement of a pack that had identified an outsider. They saw a woman. They saw age. They saw weakness. They didn't see the faint, silvery scar that traced her left eyebrow or the unnerving stillness in her hands. Eleanor stopped in front of a wall of high-end precision rifles, her eyes scanning the collection. A burly man in a branded polo shirt, the store's lead instructor and a former Marine who never let anyone forget it, strode over. His name was Marco, and his entire personality was built on a foundation of aggressive expertise. "Those are our long-range systems," he announced, his voice booming as if addressing a slow-witted child. "Very complex. Very expensive. Not exactly for plinking squirrels in the backyard. Maybe something a little more manageable. We have some lovely pink .22s over here." He gestured dismissively toward a corner of the store reserved for beginners and what he condescendingly called housewife guns. Eleanor's gaze remained fixed on the wall. She didn't acknowledge his insult. After a long moment of silence that began to feel uncomfortable even to the mockers, she lifted a hand and pointed. Her finger was steady, her voice perfectly level, cutting through the low hum of the store's air conditioning. "I'll take a look at the AX-50 ELR. The one chambered for .408 Chaytak, with the Cerakote FDE finish. And I'll need the Tier 1 Spartan 3 bipod and a Schmidt & Bender 5-45x56 PM2 scope to go with it." Silence. The casual conversation stopped. The man boasting about Vietnam let his jaw hang open. Tiffany froze, her hand hovering over the glass. Marco's condescending smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. The specific combination of rifle, caliber, and high-end accessories she just named wasn't just professional grade, it was the kind of setup used by a tiny, elite fraction of the world's best marksmen. It was a $25,000 statement, and she had delivered it like she was ordering a coffee. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. The collective smirk of Valhalla Tactical had been wiped clean, replaced by a mask of stunned disbelief. It was the operator Beard who broke first, letting out a short, incredulous laugh. "You're kidding, right? You saw that on a YouTube video," he scoffed, trying to reclaim the room's mocking tone. "You know that's a controlled item, right, Grandma? You can't just..." He trailed off as Eleanor finally turned her head, her placid gray eyes landing on him. The sheer, unadulterated confidence in her gaze made his own falter. The instructor, Marco, recovered more quickly. He was the expert here, his authority had been challenged, and he needed to reassert it. He crossed his thick arms, adopting a stance that was part lecture, part interrogation. "That's a serious piece of equipment," he said, his voice tight. "It's an extreme long-range platform. Not something you just pick up. What's your intended application?" The question was a test, a piece of professional jargon meant to expose her as a fraud. "High-angle precision fire in variable wind conditions," Eleanor replied without a flicker of hesitation. "Specifically, engaging targets in mountainous terrain where updrafts from valley floors can create unpredictable vertical stringing." Marco's eyes narrowed. She wasn't just repeating a definition, she was describing a highly specific and difficult sniping scenario. The old-timer in the camo shirt, who had actually served but only as a cook, shifted his weight uncomfortably. This was getting beyond his depth. Marco pressed on, his ego refusing to yield. "Okay. So, you know the theory. But let's talk hardware. The AX-50 has a unique, free-floating barrel design. What's the primary drawback of that system when operating in a desert environment for an extended period?" He leaned back, confident he'd caught her. It was a trick question, a fine point of maintenance he'd learned at a specialized armorer's course. Eleanor's gaze drifted back to the rifle on the wall, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "You mean besides the standard issues of sand ingress in the trigger mechanism? You're talking about the heat mirage. The free-floating design, combined with the intense thermal radiation in a desert, causes significant barrel-to-receiver mirage that interferes with the scope picture after about a dozen rounds. Most people try to use a suppressor wrap to mitigate it." She paused, letting the technical details sink in. Marco's expression was frozen. She had answered his question perfectly. But she wasn't done. But the unofficial field fix, the one they taught us during Desert Storm, was to use a thin, wetted strip of burlap. You don't wrap it. You lay it across the barrel just forward of the receiver. The evaporative cooling is just enough to disrupt the mirage for the 2 or 3 seconds you need to take a clean shot. It's not in any manual. A ripple of shock went through the onlookers. Desert Storm. She had just casually placed herself in a conflict that happened over 30 years ago. The arrogant ex-cop type, who had been watching from the pistol section, now swaggered over. He had a retired detective's badge clipped to his belt and an air of supreme authority. Desert Storm. "Honey, I was in law enforcement for 30 years. I've heard every tall tale in the book," he boomed, positioning himself as the arbiter of truth. "You don't look like you've seen a day of hardship in your life. You're just repeating stories you heard from your husband." Eleanor simply held his gaze. "The burlap trick. Did you know it?" The ex-cop's face flushed. He didn't. He was a beat cop who'd made detective, his knowledge of military-grade sniping was limited to what he saw in movies. He was out of his depth and he knew it. He fell back on simple intimidation. "I think you're wasting our time. You're either a crazy old lady or a liar. Which is it?" Eleanor ignored him, turning her attention back to Marco, who was now staring at her with a dawning, horrified respect. "The rifle," she said, her voice calm but firm. "May I see it?" Marco, for the first time, seemed at a loss for words. His entire system of judgment had been short-circuited. He looked from Eleanor's calm, expectant face to the incredulous expressions of his audience. His authority was crumbling, and in a last-ditch effort to save face, he outsourced the humiliation. He nodded toward the back of the store, where a monstrous rifle sat on a display stand. It was a Barrett M82A1, a semi-automatic anti-material rifle. It was a beast of a weapon, over 30 pounds of steel and polymer, designed to disable light vehicles, not to be handled delicately. "That's our floor model M82, Marco said, a new, crueler smirk forming. He was passing the buck. "Before we get a restricted item like the AX-50 down, why don't you show us you can handle something with a bit of heft?" A young man, built like a linebacker with a neck covered in tribal tattoos, immediately seized the opportunity. He was a local, tactical influencer, who posted endless videos of himself doing mag dumps at the local range, all machismo and no substance. He swaggered over to the Barrett. "Yeah, Grandma," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let's see you handle Big Bertha here. Bet you can't even lift it off the stand." He patted the rifle's enormous receiver. "This thing will chew you up and spit you out." The other customers chuckled, relieved. The situation was returning to a familiar script, the physical dominance of men over a frail, old woman. The ex-cop crossed his arms, a satisfied grin on his face. This would be funny. Eleanor looked at the Barrett, then at the young man, then back at the rifle. She didn't say a word. With a fluid grace that seemed impossible for her age, she set her cane against the counter. She walked toward the display, her steps even and deliberate. The influencer stepped back, making a grand, mock-chivalrous gesture. "Be my guest. Try not to throw your back out." Eleanor approached the rifle from the side. The crowd leaned in, phones half-raised, ready to capture the pathetic, comical moment of an old woman struggling with 30 pounds of metal. They expected her to grasp it awkwardly, to grunt and strain, to fail. She did none of those things. Instead of trying to lift the entire weapon, she placed her left hand under the rifle's center of balance, just forward of the magazine well. Her right hand went to the pistol grip. In a single, smooth, practiced motion, she didn't lift it, she leveraged it. Using the stand as a fulcrum, she pivoted the massive rifle, its weight seeming to vanish in her expert hands. The muzzle came up, the stock settled against her shoulder, and suddenly, the monstrous weapon looked like a natural extension of her body. There was no strain on her face, no trembling in her arms. The room fell silent. The influencer's jaw went slack. With the rifle now shouldered, she performed a series of movements that were quiet, precise, and utterly devastating to the egos in the room. Her thumb found the safety selector without looking. She leaned forward, her cheek finding the perfect weld on the stock. She reached up with her left hand and made a minute adjustment to the focus on the display scope. Then, her fingers expertly found the charging handle. She didn't yank it. She gave it a short, sharp, efficient pull and release. The clack-clack of the bolt cycling home was the only sound in the dead-quiet store. She held the position for a beat, sighting down the empty rifle at a distant point on the wall. Then, just as smoothly, she reversed the process, clearing the chamber, setting the weapon back on the stand with a soft click. She picked up her cane. Turning to the stunned influencer, she said, her voice still level, "The takedown pins on this model are a little loose. You might want to have your armorer check the tension. It could cause a receiver misalignment after a few hundred rounds." She then turned back to a pale-faced Marco. "Now, about the AX-50. The atmosphere in Valhalla Tactical had shifted from mockery to a tense, unnerving quiet. The swagger was gone, replaced by wary glances and whispers. Marco, his face a mask of professional humility, led Eleanor toward the back of the store without another word of protest. He felt the eyes of every customer on him, his authority now completely transferred to the old woman with the cane. He unlocked a heavy steel door. "Our 100-meter indoor range," he said, his voice now deferential. "Climate-controlled. State-of-the-art." "That's fine," Eleanor said, her eyes scanning the setup. The store owner, a portly man named Mr. Harrison who usually stayed in his office counting money, had been drawn out by the commotion. He saw the scene, the hushed crowd, his top instructor acting like an altar boy, and the strange old woman. Sensing a situation that could be bad for business, he decided to end it. "All right, Marco, what's going on here?" he demanded. Marco quickly explained, his voice low. Harrison's eyes widened, then narrowed with suspicion. "A demonstration, then," Harrison declared, seeing a way to either expose her as a fraud or gain a legendary story for his shop. He pointed to the end of the range. "The challenge target. 4 layers of laminated ballistic glass, then a 3-inch reactive plate. We use it for corporate demos. Nobody's ever hit the plate through the glass on a first shot. It's designed to be impossible, to show how tough the glass is." The ex-cop smirked. "Yeah, lady. Let's see you shoot through that." He was certain this was where the fantasy would finally end. Marco carefully brought out the AX-50, placing it on the shooting bench with the reverence it deserved. Eleanor ran a hand over the cool Cerakote finish, her touch familiar, like greeting an old friend. She adjusted the scope with quick, efficient twists, her movements economical and certain. She loaded a single, long, bronze-colored .408 Chaytak round into the chamber. She settled onto the shooting stool, placing her cane on the floor beside her. She didn't use the bench rests or sandbags. Instead, she took a shooter's stance, creating a stable platform with her own body. She pulled the rifle into her shoulder, becoming one with the machine. The room held its breath. She closed her eyes for 2 full seconds. She wasn't looking at the target. She was feeling the infinitesimal hum of the building's ventilation system, sensing the air pressure. She opened them, acquired the target, and in the space between one heartbeat and the next, the rifle roared. The sound was immense, a deep-throated crack of thunder that reverberated through the concrete walls. The bullet, a tiny speck of hypersonic copper and lead, was invisible. But its effect was not. Crack, 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 crack. 4 distinct sounds as it punched through the 4 layers of ballistic glass, each pane exploding into a spiderweb of fractures. Ping! A 5th, higher-pitched sound as the round struck the reactive plate dead center, sending it spinning wildly. The impossible had happened. The demonstration designed to show failure had become a showcase of impossible skill. Mr. Harrison stared, speechless. The old-timer's cigar fell from his lips. The influencer was filming with a trembling hand, whispering, "No way, no way, no way." In the ringing silence that followed, Eleanor calmly cycled the bolt, ejecting the spent shell casing, which tinkled as it hit the concrete floor. She pushed herself up from the stool, her movements betraying a slight stiffness in her joints now that the adrenaline was fading. As she reached down to pick up her cane, the sleeve of her old jacket rode up her forearm. And there, on the weathered skin of her inner wrist, was a tattoo. It was faded, the lines blurred by decades of sun and time, but its design was unmistakable to the few who would know it. It was a coiled rattlesnake in front of a jagged lightning bolt, the insignia of a highly classified, long-disbanded special reconnaissance unit from the late 80s and early 90s. The ex-cop squinted, his face turning ashen. I've seen that before," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "In a classified briefing. That unit, they said it never officially existed." The revelation of the tattoo sent a new wave of shock through the room. The whispers turned from speculation to frantic, hushed theories. This wasn't just a skilled shooter, this was a ghost. A relic from a hidden corner of military history, standing in their midst. Mr. Harrison was fumbling with his phone, trying to discreetly Google the insignia, but finding nothing. Such symbols didn't live on the public internet. Tiffany, the receptionist, looked like she had seen an actual phantom, her face drained of all color and condescension. Marco, the instructor, simply stared at Eleanor's wrist, a profound, soul-shaking respect dawning in his eyes. He wasn't just in the presence of a better shooter, he was in the presence of a legend. It was at this moment of stunned paralysis that a new sound intruded, a sound that didn't belong in a suburban strip mall, the rhythmic, percussive whomp-whomp-whomp of helicopter blades. Heads turned toward the large storefront windows. Hovering over the parking lot, kicking up dust and debris, was a black UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter with no markings except a small, official seal on its tail. As the customers gaped, the helicopter settled into a designated landing zone that hadn't been there 10 minutes ago, its powerful downdraft rattling the windows of Valhalla Tactical. The store's front door chimed softly. The sound was absurdly gentle in the face of the roaring machine outside. Two men entered. The first was a young captain in a perfectly pressed army service uniform, his face impassive. The second man, who followed a step behind, commanded the entire room's attention without saying a word. He was in his late 50s, tall and lean, with a face that looked like it was carved from granite. His uniform was immaculate, and on each shoulder sat the unmistakable cluster of 4 silver stars. He was a full general of the United States Army. The sight of the 4-star general inside the store was so surreal, so utterly out of context, that for a moment, everyone thought it was some kind of elaborate prank. But the weight of his presence was undeniable. The ex-cop instinctively straightened his posture. The old-timer looked like he might faint. The general's eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the room, passing over the gawking faces, dismissing them as irrelevant scenery. They landed on Eleanor. He strode forward, his polished boots clicking on the concrete floor. The young captain moved to intercept, but the general waved him off. He walked directly to Eleanor, stopping 2 feet in front of her. The entire store held its breath. Then, the impossible happened again. The 4-star general, a man who commanded entire divisions and answered only to the Joint Chiefs and the President, brought his heels together with a sharp click. He raised his hand in a crisp, perfect salute. "Ma'am," he said, his voice resonating with a deep, unwavering respect that silenced every thought in the room. "You're a hard woman to find. It's been a long time." Eleanor did not salute back, she was a civilian. She simply gave a small, weary nod. "Hello, Michael. I see they've been keeping you busy." The general lowered his salute, a warm, genuine smile breaking through his stern demeanor. "You taught me everything I know about staying busy, ma'am. And about shooting." He glanced at the AX-50 on the bench, then at the shattered glass downrange. "Looks like you haven't lost your touch." He turned slightly, his gaze sweeping over the pale, terrified faces of Marco, Harrison, and the others. His smile vanished, replaced by an arctic chill. "We have a situation at Fort Bragg," the general said, turning his full attention back to Eleanor. "The new generation of scout snipers, they're good, but they're textbook. They're failing the asymmetric warfare scenarios. The Secretary of Defense specifically asked if I could get the best instructor I ever had to consult. He asked for Valkyrie." He paused. "I told him I'd try." Valkyrie. A call sign. A name whispered in legends. The best damn shot the special reconnaissance community had ever produced. And she was standing right here, leaning on a cane. The general's words hung in the air, heavier than any rifle. Valkyrie. The name echoed in the cavernous space, rewriting reality for everyone present. The frail old woman they had mocked was a living legend, a ghost from the highest echelons of the special operations world. Eleanor gave a faint, tired sigh. "I'm retired, Michael." "We know," the general said softly. "This isn't an order. It's a request. From a nation that still needs you. We have a car waiting." He gestured to the door, a silent offer. Eleanor looked around the store, at the faces now frozen in a state of awe and terror. She looked at the rifle on the bench. She had come here for a piece of her old life, only to have the whole thing come crashing back in. With a final nod, she picked up her cane. "All right, Michael. Let's go." As she walked toward the door, the general fell into step a half-pace behind her, the position of an aide, not a superior. At the threshold, Eleanor paused and looked back at Mr. Harrison, the owner. "Send the bill for the glass to the Department of Defense," she said, her voice devoid of malice, a simple statement of fact. Then she was gone. The helicopter lifted off minutes later, leaving a vortex of dust and shattered egos in the parking lot. Inside Valhalla Tactical, the silence was deafening. No one dared to speak. The spell of their self-importance had been irrevocably broken. The aftermath was not swift and dramatic, but slow, quiet, and ruinous, a series of logical consequences. Mr. Harrison, terrified of repercussions from the Pentagon, did a thorough review of the day's events. Tiffany, the snide receptionist, was fired the next morning for unprofessional conduct that risks damaging client relationships. Her tearful protests that everyone else was doing it fell on deaf ears. Marco, the instructor, found his world collapsing. The tactical influencer had, of course, posted his shaky footage online. It went viral in the gun community, but not in the way he'd hoped. The video didn't show an old woman being humiliated, it showed a legend being disrespected. Marco's face was clearly visible, his condescension on full display. His classes dried up. His sponsorships were quietly cancelled by brands who didn't want to be associated with him. Within 2 months, he closed his training business. The boastful Vietnam-era veteran stopped coming to the store. His audience had evaporated, and the other regulars now looked at him with contempt for having disrespected a true operator. The arrogant ex-cop became a laughingstock at his local police union hall when the story got out. His authority, built on bluster, evaporated overnight. The consequences were just dominoes falling in a line pushed by their own arrogance. Eleanor never had to say a word. Her actions, and the quiet authority of her legacy, were enough. The truth, once revealed, had a weight all its own. She hadn't sought revenge or validation. She had just wanted to buy a rifle. But in defending her own dignity, she had held up a mirror to a room full of men, and they had been shattered by their own reflection. We've all felt it, haven't we? That moment of being judged on sight, of being underestimated because of how we look, our age, or our gender. Eleanor's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about loud boasts or looking the part. It's a quiet confidence, held deep within, forged by experience. What part of her story hit you the hardest? Let us know in the comments below. And please, as we share our own experiences, let's comment with respect for one another. Everyone has a story we can't see on the surface. If you found strength in this story, give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe for more true stories of quiet power and unexpected vindication. You are not alone.